You're listening to Systemic Error Podcast. The failure was designed.
MAGA influencer tears apart impotent Trump, based on an article by Matthew Rosa. The GOP is complaining about Trump's impotence after helping build it. What the story actually shows. The source is not about a sudden moral awakening on the right. It is about Republican-aligned figures discovering that the strongman they sold to their audience is not delivering the fantasy they promised. Erick Erickson, who opposed Trump in 2016 and then endorsed him in 2020 and 2024, is now arguing that Trump risks losing his base because he looks impotent. That is the real political event here. Not accountability, but buyer's remorse from an enabler. Power sits at the top. Trump is still the central institutional actor in this story. The article makes that plain by tying the complaints to his control over policy, war, prosecutions, and symbolic displays of power. He is the one who chose to wage the Iran war, the one whose attempts to prosecute enemies have fallen short, and the one whose authority is so overextended that his failures become part of his brand. Mike Johnson appears in the same pattern. According to the source, he has ceded power and decision making to the White House, turning the speakership into a vessel for presidential domination. That is not weakness in a neutral sense. It is active surrender of institutional power. The right is misdirecting the blame. The most revealing word in the piece is impotent, because it converts political failure into a masculinity crisis. That is classic right-wing misdirection. It turns deliberate authoritarian overreach into a question of personal vigor, as if the problem were that Trump cannot get things done, rather than that he is trying to rule through spectacle, punishment, and humiliation. The source also shows the conservative commentariat doing what it always does when the center of power disappoints its own coalition. It scapegoats the optics. The reflecting pool, the East Wing, the Epstein scandal, the Iran war. These are not random embarrassments. They are evidence of a governing style that confuses destruction with command and publicity with control. Performance is not capacity. Trump's project was always sold as competence through force. The article undercuts that myth with examples that are almost too on the nose. A public pool he cannot clean, a war he cannot win, enemies he cannot successfully prosecute, a scandal he cannot bury. That is the structure of authoritarian politics in miniature. It promises total mastery, then depends on enough inertia, fear, and propaganda to keep the audience from noticing the gap between claim and capability. The point is not that Trump is secretly restrained by institutions. The point is that he is very good at seizing power and very bad at turning that power into coherent public benefit. The source gets closest to the truth when it accidentally admits that his movement runs on projection. The Republican coalition owns this. Erickson and the other commentators quoted here are not outside observers. They help normalize the man they now describe as weak. Their complaint is not that Trump is authoritarian. It is that he is failing to produce the results authoritarian voters were promised. That is a more honest admission than most Republican rhetoric, but it is still self-protective. They want to separate the brand damage from the original sale. Johnson's role is even clearer. A speaker who cedes decision-making to Trump is not being overwhelmed by events. He is participating in the hollowing out of Congress. The article's language about bipartisan discharge petitions matters because it shows that when leadership kneels, members eventually reach for procedural workarounds. The institution does not disappear all at once. It is drained by cowardice, then bypassed. The broader pattern. This story is about a political movement that mistakes domination for competence and then panics when the performance starts to fail in public. The right does not object to the cruelty. It objects when the cruelty stops looking effective. That distinction matters. The deeper lesson is simple. Authoritarian politics often collapses into theater long before it collapses in practice. The audience is told to admire force, then asked to excuse failure, then instructed to blame everyone except the people who concentrated power in the first place. What looks here like a crisis of impotence is really a crisis of credibility inside a coalition that chose spectacle over governance and is now watching its own mythology come apart. You've been listening to Systemic Error. Thanks to Alternet for today's article, with the automated voice of Leibritz R. Thanks for listening.